In the modern world of side hustles and always-on productivity, it's always easy to feel like you could be getting more done. But what if I told you that the most productive hour of your day might not be the one you spend chained to your desk over your lunch break, but the one you spend lying in the park looking at the sky? Or that by giving yourself longer deadlines to work on the goals that are really important to you, you're more likely to achieve them. Those are a couple of the arguments Newport makes in his new book, Slow Productivity, which is written as a kind of call to reject artificial business in the pursuit of meaningful, useful work. The whole book has a ton of useful advice in it, and you should probably read the whole thing. But in this video, I want to break down the most important 3 principles from it, and we're going to start with the most counterintuitive sounding one, which is to do fewer things. So there's kind of a common story about Jane Austen that she did all of her writing in between her social engagements, scribbling out her books on little sheets of paper that she could easily hide when a creaking door in her house told her that someone was coming. But it turns out this isn't actually true. Jane Austen wrote basically all of her best stuff in a short period of time after her and her family moved to a place called Chawton, where she had basically no social engagements and almost no domestic responsibilities. And unfortunately, we can't all live like Jane Austen. But the point Newport makes in these chapters is that we should try and emulate her a little bit by reducing our obligations down until we can focus on a small handful of things that we think really matter. And so Newport has a bunch of advice for this, but I think the most important is to limit missions, limit projects, and limit daily goals. When a mission is any sort of ongoing big work or personal goal, a project is any piece of work that you can't get done in one day, and a daily goal is whatever you want to get done in a typical day. So limiting missions is about not having too many things to do at once. Newport reckons the upper limit is about 5, and I think that's probably pretty reasonable if you take into account like the work and productivity stuff you're doing and any side projects you're doing. Like for me, that might be Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and piano. For limiting projects, I think Newport's most helpful bit of advice is to kind of get good at understanding the limitations of your own time and then communicating that to other people. So if you can get in the habit of correctly assessing how much of your time a certain task is likely to take up and plotting out your days accordingly, it's a lot easier to turn people down when they come in with more things that are going to take up more of your time. So for instance, if you're at work and your boss comes in and goes, okay, I just need you to do this quick thing for me, then it's about being able to go, from experience, I know that this will take me like half an hour. I currently have these other commitments. Which one of these do you want me to prioritize? And the better you get at that, the more you'll be able to manage and protect your own time. Or as Newport puts it, saying no isn't so bad if you've got hard evidence that it's the only reasonable answer. And then limiting daily goals is really just about limiting the amount of things that you're really aiming to accomplish in any one day. So the ideal would be 1, and that doesn't mean throwing away all the like normal admin that you have to address in the course of your life, but it does mean sitting down at the start of your day and going, okay, if I only accomplish this 1 or 2 or 3 things, then I will be happy that it's been a productive day. And I've been doing a version of this for years now. I basically always sit down and go, these are the 3 things I absolutely want to do today, and this is the most important one. And that works out great for me. So a bit of advice I really like in this chapter is to put tasks on autopilot, which just means that you're going to do specific parts of your work at specific times and ideally in specific places, so that getting them done feels like a sort of little daily ritual. So if you're a freelancer, maybe you always check your invoicing on a Friday morning in your home office, but then you take a walk to a local coffee shop to run through your email pitches for the coming week. This is about making your regular tasks as low stress as possible, and it's kind of something I was doing before I read this book. I actually think it's really helpful because you can keep track of the times when you're low on energy and save your most boring tasks for those times, then protect your productive hours for work. And the final bit of advice I like in this section is to avoid task engines. And task engines are something that Newport defines as anything that generates a whole bunch of little annoying jobs to do. So for instance, for me as a writer, sometimes a 700-word article can take more effort to write than one that's 2,000 words long. Because the short one is about something I don't really understand that well, which means I'm going to have to interview a whole bunch of people and read a whole bunch of separate articles, cross-reference to what everybody's saying, and then check it back with them. Or there are some people who offer me work, but I know I'm going to have to chase them 3 times before I pay an invoice, and I have to factor that into the decision of whether I actually want to work for them or not. So for me, avoiding task engines means I just don't work with people who have to be chased for invoices, because it's not something I'm very good at, it's certainly not something I enjoy doing, and it's something that pulls me away from the creative work that I'd rather be focusing on. And some of this stuff's not that easy, but it is well worth trying out, because if you can do it, then you're well on your way to the next bit of advice in the book, which is to work at a natural pace. So obviously 300,000 years ago, we were all hunter-gatherers, and there was a pretty good chance of you starving or getting attacked by a wild animal. And if you broke your leg, that was pretty much you done. But at the same time, you did actually get quite a bit of downtime. Studies on modern hunter-gathering tribes suggest that they spend as much as 50% of their waking hours at leisure, compared to about 30% for people engaged in agriculture. And even though farming is hard work and kind of monotonous, the seasonal nature of it means that you at least got a bit of enforced downtime during festivals and holidays, which stopped happening when the Industrial Revolution kicked in and a huge chunk of the population went to work in factories. Now, most of us still work this regular 9 to 5. And even though what Newport refers to as knowledge work isn't as soul destroying as working in a factory, a lot of us don't have unions to protect our downtime anymore, and emails and Zoom mean that work quite often expands well into our leisure time. And so what Newport suggests is that we look for ways to return to a more natural pace of work. So a first step towards this might be to think in terms of a 5-year plan for some of your biggest projects, to protect yourself from feeling like you should be constantly making progress on them and ultimately then burning out. And this is something that's definitely helped me. When I first started this YouTube channel, I decided that I'd commit to running it for at least a couple of years before I started worrying about making money for it. And that actually worked pretty well, with my first serious check coming in about 24 months after I first got serious about the channel. By the way, please do subscribe if you'd like to support me, it really does help. And last year I had a chat with a publisher about writing a book, but after initially freaking out and thinking I'd be able to write it in 6 months, I decided to take a more relaxed approach and focus in on sitting down, taking my time and writing the best book that I possibly can. This lines up pretty well with Newport's advice to double your project timelines, which helps us to avoid Hofstadter's law, especially on the kinds of knowledge-based projects that we're terrible about estimating the length of. But maybe my favourite bit of advice in this section of the book is to think seasonally. So rather than working at full speed the whole time, the idea is to vary the focus and intensity of your efforts throughout the year. Maybe taking on less freelance projects or scheduling less time on your side hustles to give yourself a chance to kind of read and explore things you're just interested in. One idea I really like here is to schedule rest projects, by which Newport means scheduling time in and deliberately putting time aside to do stuff like watching every Tony Jaa film or reading a load of Garth Ennis comics. By the way, these are my examples, not his. He also suggests using small seasonality by doing things like never scheduling meetings on Mondays. And obviously this is kind of tough to do if you're not at least reasonably senior in your job, but it's also something you can do with personal projects. So for instance, I try and play piano most days, but instead of doing technical drills and sight reading practice on Saturdays, I just kind of sit down and jam out playing whatever I feel like, which is kind of a nice way to chill out and remind myself what I'm practicing in the first place. And although at jiu-jitsu, most sessions I go in with a specific plan about what I want to drill and work on and which moves I want to go for, when I'm starting to feel a bit burned out with that process, I will kind of chill out and just go and spar and roll with whoever's there and just try and have a fun time and remind myself why I love the sport. And that's cool, it works out great. And then the final section of the book explains why you should obsess over quality. And in the slow productivity mindset, this is kind of the glue that holds the other two parts together. Because doing fewer things and working at a more natural pace should be the things that allow you to slow down and spend more time really obsessing over working on the few things that you want to be really good at. So as a writer, obviously my days are full of pitching people, doing admin, chasing invoices, promoting my own stuff on social media. But the core activities that are going to change the quality of my life and work are basically writing high quality articles, scripts and books. Because that's ultimately what you want to produce. And so that gives me the kind of steer that anything I can do to minimize the other activities is great, and anything I can do to maximize the amount of time I have to spend thinking and actually writing is probably ideal. And Newport's suggestion is that an obsession with quality both demands and enables slowness. Because you can't just churn out high quality work, but also as you get a reputation for producing high quality work, you should be able to up your rates and do less as a consequence. So for me, this section feels a little bit scattergun compared to the rest of the book, and it's got some advice in that feels like it's probably worked for Newport personally, like getting really into the cinema as a way of improving his writing, or buying a fancy notebook as a way of signaling to himself that he's taking his writing seriously. But I think the overarching bit of advice to bet on yourself while still giving yourself a bit of a safety net while you're waiting for your bigger projects to take off is pretty good. Because if you're working on your most important projects late at night or over weekends, that takes the pressure off to make them succeed immediately and in a way that can support you financially, which means that you can concentrate on actually making them good. And one thing that I think is very helpful here is Newport's two-pronged approach to deciding whether it's time to make the leap into doing something more permanently, which is to first wait until there's evidence that people will give you money for it, and secondly, wait until you're sure that you can replicate the result. So in YouTube terms, you don't want to quit your job after you've done one banger video, but if you do 3 or 4 and you're pretty sure you know what goes into making them, maybe it's time to focus on that a little bit harder. So can the most productive hour of your day really be the one you spend lying on the grass? I actually think it can. If you can scale back your to-do list and focus hard on the tasks that are really important to you, making the time to let your thoughts come together in your mind can be one of the most important things you can do. But there's one more really important thing to do that can help you focus and produce the work you want. And to learn more about that, I suggest watching this video next. I will see you over there.